The first lesson is not dark dot, it is not evil dot, it is simply uncomfortable. People act in their own interest dot, not sometimes dot, not occasionally dot, always, even when they are kind, even when they are generous, even when they say they care. Beneath every decision is a silent calculation. What does this mean for me? What do I gain? What do I risk? Machiavelli understood this before psychology had a name for it. He watched alliances collapse the moment survival was threatened. He saw loyalty disappear when power shifted. He observed friends turn into rivals when opportunity appeared. And he realized something dangerous. Gratitude fades. Advantage does not. Think about your own life. Have you ever helped someone rise, only to feel distance once they surpassed you? Have you ever defended someone, only to watch them protect their own reputation when things went wrong? Have you ever believed words, only to be surprised by actions? This is not because people are evil. It is because survival sits deeper than sentiment. When status is threatened, behavior changes. When opportunity appears, loyalty is tested. When fear enters the room, morality negotiates. Look at workplace politics. Two colleagues are friendly. They support each other. They share information. Then a promotion opens. Suddenly, information becomes guarded. Praise becomes subtle competition. Smiles feel thinner. Nothing personal, just shifting incentives. Self-interest is like gravity. It pulls behavior toward advantage. Machiavelli did not condemn this. He studied it. He understood that expecting people to consistently act against their own benefit is naive. Strategically intelligent individuals do not rely on promises. They observe patterns. Watch what someone does when there is nothing to gain. Watch what someone does when there is something to lose. Pressure reveals priority. And priority reveals truth. This is where many intelligent people get hurt. They project their own loyalty onto others. They assume, I would never do that, so they won't either. But others do not share your internal code. They share human nature. Here is the shift. Instead of asking, why did they betray me? Ask, what incentive made that choice logical for them? Instead of feeling shocked, feel informed. When you understand incentives, you reduce surprise. When you reduce surprise, you reduce emotional reaction. And when you reduce emotional reaction, you gain strategic clarity. But here is the balance. Understanding self-interest does not mean becoming cynical. It means becoming realistic. It means you diversify trust. You avoid emotional dependency. You build strength that does not collapse when one alliance shifts. You never give someone power over your stability without understanding what they gain from protecting it. Self-interest also explains something powerful. People support strength. Why? Because strength benefits them. If your growth increases their status, they align with you. If your success threatens their identity, they distance from you. This is not betrayal. It is human positioning. Once you accept this truth, you stop personalizing strategic behavior. You stop expecting unconditional loyalty in competitive environments. You stop revealing all your vulnerabilities to people who may one day calculate against them. Instead, you build leverage through competence, leverage through perception, leverage through emotional control, and something interesting happens. When you no longer depend on loyalty, people respect you more, because dependence signals weakness, and weakness shifts incentives against you. Machiavelli's first lesson is not about distrust. It is about awareness. Awareness that everyone, including you, moves according to perceived benefit. Even generosity feels good. Even sacrifice can protect. Identity. Self-interest does not always look selfish. Sometimes it looks noble. That is why it is hard to see. So the question becomes, can you observe behavior without illusion? Can you understand motivation without taking it personally? Because once you do, you stop being predictable, and predictable people are the easiest to control. This is where dangerous intelligence begins, and it leads to an even more controversial insight about authority itself. This is the lesson that made Machiavelli infamous. It sounds ruthless. It sounds cold, but it is brutally practical. If you must choose, it is safer to be feared than loved. Notice the wording. Safer. Not better, not morally superior, safer, because love is fragile. Fear is predictable. Love depends on emotion. Fear depends on consequence. And emotions shift. Consequences. Single quotes. Think about this carefully. When people love you, they stay because they feel good. When people fear you, they stay because leaving costs them. Now ask yourself, which one survives pressure? History gives us the answer. Leaders who relied only on affection were abandoned the moment crisis hit, but leaders who maintained controlled fear, they held order, even when storms came. Why? Because affection disappears when self-interest rises, but fear anchors behavior to survival. Let's break this psychologically. Love activates warmth, bonding, attachment, but attachment competes with other incentives. If someone offers your supporter a better opportunity, if loyalty threatens their safety, if your leadership weakens, love can dissolve. Fear activates risk assessment. Fear asks, what happens if I cross this line? What is the cost of disobedience? That calculation stabilizes structure. This is why parents who only seek friendship from their children struggle with discipline. This is why bosses who want to be liked lose authority. This is why leaders who avoid confrontation lose control when there are no consequences. There is no boundary. And without boundaries, respect erodes. But here is where most people misunderstand Machiavelli. He did not advocate cruelty. He warned against hatred. There is a difference between being feared and being hated. Hatred is emotional. Fear is structural. Hatred creates rebellion. Fear creates caution. The key is controlled fear, predictable consequences, clear standards, calm enforcement, not emotional explosions, not insecurity, not ego. True authority is quiet. When you speak, people listen, not because you yell, but because they know you mean it. The most dangerous leaders are not loud. They are precise. They rarely punish, but when they do, it is decisive and unforgettable. This creates psychological imprint, and imprint shapes behavior long-term. Let's translate this into modern life. In friendships, if you never set boundaries, people test you. In relationships, if there are no consequences for disrespect, disrespect grows. In business, if your standards bend every time someone pressures you, you lose leverage. Being loved feels good, but being respected protects you. And respect requires the possibility of discomfort. Even in your personal life, this matters. If you constantly sacrifice your needs to maintain approval, people subconsciously rank you lower in power. And power ranking affects how they treat you. Human beings instinctively evaluate dominance. Hierarchy is biological. Confidence signals capability. Boundaries signal strength. Consequences signal power. And power commands attention. Here's the uncomfortable truth. People rarely betray those who can retaliate. They often betray those who cannot. That is not morality. That is risk management. However, and this is critical, fear must never become cruelty. Cruelty invites unity against you. Strategic fear maintains distance, not hatred. The strongest position, loved by many, feared by those who consider crossing you. That balance creates stability. If people love you but do not fear losing your respect, they take advantage. If people fear you but do not respect you, they plot against you. But if they respect you and understand consequences, they align. Machiavelli was not promoting tyranny. He was describing reality. In unstable environments, kindness without strength becomes vulnerability. Authority without enforcement becomes suggestion. And suggestion is easy to ignore. So the real question is not, do you want to be loved or feared? The real question is, what happens if someone challenges you? If the answer is nothing, you are relying on emotion, and emotion is temporary. This lesson prepares you for something deeper. Because once you understand power dynamics, you must learn how perception shapes them. Most people think power comes from strength, from money, from intelligence, from physical dominance. But Machiavelli saw something far more subtle. Power comes from perception, not what is true. What is believed to be true? If people believe you are powerful, they treat you as powerful. If people believe you are weak, they test you. Reality matters, but perception decides how reality is approached. And in human systems, perception spreads faster than facts. Think about reputation. To people make the same mistake. One has a reputation for competence. The other has a reputation for incompetence. Who gets forgiven? Who gets doubted? Same action. Different perception, different outcome. That is power. Machiavelli understood that leaders survive not by being morally perfect, but by appearing stable, decisive, and capable, because public confidence sustains authority. Doubt erodes it. Once doubt spreads, challenge follows. This applies far beyond politics. In your workplace, if you present yourself as uncertain, hesitant, constantly apologizing, people subconsciously downgrade your authority, even if you are skilled. But if you speak clearly, move deliberately, and rarely over-explain, people assume competence. Even before proof, the human brain fills gaps with narrative. And narratives become reality. Here's something uncomfortable. Most people do not analyze deeply. They react to signals, tone of voice. Body language, clothing, social proof. Association. If respected individuals treat you as valuable, others follow. If influential people ignore you, others hesitate. This is social mirroring. Machiavelli would say, manage the optics. Because optics create influence. Now be careful. This is not about deception for chaos. It is about strategic presentation. You may be ambitious, but appearing desperate weakens you. You may be intelligent, but appearing arrogant isolates you. You may be powerful, but appearing unpredictable creates fear beyond control. The goal is intentional image, calm under pressure, measured in response, selective. In exposure. Notice something. The strongest individuals rarely reveal everything. They allow mystery. Why? Because mystery creates perceived depth, and perceived depth increases psychological weight. In negotiations, the one who speaks less often controls the tempo. In arguments, the one who reacts least appears strongest. In leadership, the one who remains composed during crisis becomes the anchor. Perception of stability equals authority. This is why emotional control is a weapon. If someone can provoke you publicly, they reduce your perceived dominance. If someone can expose your insecurity, they weaken your influence. Once perception cracks, hierarchy shifts. But here's the deeper layer. You must also control how others see your intentions. If you are known as vindictive, people unite against you. If you are known as fair but firm, people hesitate to oppose you. Fairness increases legitimacy. Legitimacy strengthens power. Machiavelli advised rulers to appear merciful, faithful, humane, honest, religious, even if circumstances required flexibility behind the scenes. Because image stabilizes rule. Again, this is not encouragement for corruption. It is awareness of social mechanics. In modern terms, your brand shapes your opportunities. Your reputation enters rooms before you do. And once people categorize you, they interact with the category, not always the real you. So you must ask, what category do I occupy in others' minds? Reliable, naive, intimidating, replaceable, leader, follower? You cannot avoid perception, but you can influence it. Consistency builds it. Silence protects it. Strategic action reinforces it. And one more truth, never destroy your own perception by oversharing weakness to those who have not. Earn trust. Vulnerability is powerful in safe spaces. But in competitive environments, information becomes leverage. Once someone defines you as fragile, they interact with you through that lens. So guard your narrative, refine your presence, master your reactions. Because once you understand that people respond to signals more than substance, you stop fighting unnecessary battles. You start shaping the stage itself. And when you shape the stage, you shape the outcome. But perception alone is not enough, because even strong images collapse without protection. Which leads us to the next lesson about eliminating threats before they grow. Now we step into something colder, more strategic. More dangerous. Half measures create enemies. Unfinished conflicts create revenge. Wounded rivals do not forget. They wait. Machiavelli observed this repeatedly in political history. Leaders who removed power partially, but not entirely, created future rebellion. Because humiliation plus survival equals long-term vengeance. If you harm someone's status, influence, or pride, and they still retain the ability to recover, you have not solved the problem. You have delayed it. This lesson is not about physical destruction. It is about strategic finality. When you decide to confront a threat, do it in a way that prevents its return. Why? Because humans have long memories for humiliation. You might move on. They won't. Think about workplace politics. You expose someone publicly for incompetence, they lose face. But they keep their position. What happens next? They begin quietly collecting ammunition. They build alliances. They wait for your mistake. Now the environment becomes silent warfare. You created a rival who has motivation and proximity. Machiavelli's insight was simple. Minor injury invites revenge. Total defeat removes capacity. The psychological principle behind this is status preservation. When someone's identity is threatened, they experience it as survival danger, and survival danger activates persistence. This is why small betrayals create larger retaliation cycles. This is why unresolved arguments in relationships resurface years later. This is why leaders who hesitate during rebellion encourage larger rebellion. Now, important distinction: destroy does not always mean aggression. Sometimes it means neutralization. Sometimes it means strategic distancing. Sometimes it means removing leverage. If someone consistently undermines you, and you merely argue with them, the game continues. But if you remove their access to influence, if you restructure the system so their sabotage has no effect, you eliminate the threat without noise. That is strategic destruction. Another example. Let's say someone spreads subtle rumors about you. If you confront them emotionally, they deny it and escalate privately. But if you strengthen your reputation publicly through consistent performance and alliances, their words lose power. Their weapon disappears. Threat neutralized. No drama. The deeper lesson is this: do not engage in prolonged low-level conflict. It drains energy. It exposes weakness. It invites observation. If a challenge must be addressed, address it decisively. Calmly. With clarity. And in a way that prevents repetition. Machiavelli warned rulers not to lightly injure opponents, because injured opponents unify. They justify their retaliation. They become martyrs in their own story. But when opposition is removed cleanly, others hesitate to challenge. Strength displayed once prevents multiple future tests. This applies to personal boundaries too. If someone repeatedly disrespects you and you forgive without consequence, you teach them your limits are flexible. Flexible limits invite repeated crossing. But when you respond firmly the first time, respectfully, but immovable, the pattern stops. Because uncertainty disappears. Humans test where there is ambiguity. They rarely test where there is clarity. There is also an internal version of this lesson. Have commitment to self-discipline creates internal conflict. If you try to eliminate bad habits sometimes, the habit survives. If you remove triggers entirely, the behavior loses oxygen. Complete removal is easier than partial resistance. This is why strong people often appear extreme in their standards. They don't negotiate with patterns that weaken them, they remove them. But here is the ethical boundary. Destruction should never be impulsive, never ego-driven. Never emotional, because emotional destruction creates unintended enemies. Strategic finality is calm. Calculated. Proportionate. The goal is stability, not chaos. If you create fear without stability, you become unstable yourself. But if you remove threats efficiently, quietly, and rarely, your environment becomes predictable. And predictability is power. Remember this: a rival left alive in strength becomes a future crisis. A conflict left unresolved becomes future tension. A boundary left unclear becomes future disrespect. Finish what you start. End what you confront, or do not begin at all. Because incomplete action is the birthplace of revenge. And revenge is patient. Now we move into something even more subtle. How generosity, when misused, weakens authority. Now we enter a lesson most good people struggle to accept, because it challenges identity. Kindness is powerful, but uncontrolled generosity is dangerous. Machiavelli observed that rulers who tried hard to be generous eventually destroyed their own stability. Why? Because generosity has a hidden cost. Resources are finite. Time is finite. Energy is finite. And when you give excessively to maintain approval, you create expectation. Expectation becomes entitlement. Entitlement becomes pressure. And pressure becomes resentment when you can no longer provide. Think about this carefully. If you give someone a favor once, they feel grateful. If you give them favors repeatedly, they adapt. If you stop giving, they feel wronged. The same act that once earned appreciation now creates disappointment. Why? Because humans normalize benefit quickly. Psychologists call this hedonic adaptation. We adapt to improvements and begin treating them as baseline. This applies to money, attention, emotional support. Access. If you are always available, your availability loses value. If you are always forgiving, your forgiveness loses weight. If you are always giving, your giving stops feeling like generosity and starts feeling like obligation. Machiavelli warned leaders against buying loyalty with constant rewards, because loyalty purchased through benefit disappears when someone else offers more. That kind of loyalty is transactional. And in transactions, the highest bidder wins. True strength does not rely on constant giving. It relies on structured respect. Here's the deeper psychology. When you overgive, You subtly communicate that you need acceptance. Need reduces perceived power. Perceived power influences how others treat you. People instinctively value what is scarce. Scarcity creates importance. Over-availability creates invisibility. Think about the friend who always pays. The coworker who always covers shifts. The partner who always compromises. At first, they're appreciated. Eventually, they're expected, and once expected, they're taken for granted. The shift is quiet, but it's real. Now understand this clearly. This lesson is not anti-kindness. It is anti-imbalance. Strategic generosity builds influence. Excessive generosity builds dependency and weakens authority. Strong individuals give selectively. They give where it strengthens alliance. They give where it builds mutual respect. They do not give to avoid rejection. They do not give to prevent conflict. They do not give to secure love, because generosity rooted in fear eventually collapses. Another hard truth. When you solve all problems for people, you reduce their need to grow. Then, when you step back, they blame you for their discomfort. You train them to rely on you. Machiavelli believed a ruler should avoid actions that create long-term financial strain just to appear benevolent, because once resources run thin, dissatisfaction grows, and dissatisfaction destabilizes power. Translate this into personal life. If you continuously sacrifice your standards to maintain harmony, resentment builds internally. Resentment leaks subtly. Tone shifts, energy shifts, respect declines. Eventually, you either explode or fade. Both outcomes damage relationships. Balanced generosity, however, is powerful. When you give unexpectedly, when you give from strength. When you give without draining yourself, that creates loyalty rooted in admiration, not dependency. Here is a powerful shift. Instead of asking, "How much can I give?" ask, "Does this giving strengthen or weaken my position?" If it strengthens, proceed. If it weakens, reconsider. True influence does not come from constant rewards. It comes from consistency, boundaries, and occasional strategic generosity. And something else happens when you stop overgiving. People begin to work for your approval. They begin to value your time. They begin to respect your limits. Because limits signal self-worth. Self-worth signals strength, and strength attracts alignment. Remember, if your generosity creates expectation instead of appreciation, you are not building loyalty. You are building pressure, and pressure eventually cracks structures. Power sustained over time requires discipline, even in kindness. Because the world does not collapse from cruelty alone. It also collapses from unsustainable softness. And that brings us to another critical principle. Why adaptability, not stubborn morality, determines survival. Most people want to believe that consistency of character guarantees survival. That if you are always honest, always kind, always principled, the world will reward you. But Machiavelli observed something different. The world rewards adaptability, not rigidity, because conditions change, power shifts, alliances realign, opportunities appear and disappear, and those who refuse to adjust break. He wrote that a ruler must learn how not to be good when circumstances demand it, not because goodness is useless, but because blind goodness is predictable, and predictability is exploitable. Let's translate this psychologically. If people know you will always forgive, they push limits. If people know you will never confront, they dominate. If people know you will always tell the full truth regardless of consequence, they manipulate. That transparency, rigid morality in a flexible world creates vulnerability. This does not mean abandoning values. It means understanding context. Imagine two leaders. One insists on the same strategy regardless of crisis. The other studies the situation and adjusts tone, speed, and tactics. Which one survives long term? Evolution gives us the answer. The strongest species were not the largest. They were the most adaptable. Flexibility equals survival. Machiavelli understood that fortune, randomness, chaos, external events plays a massive role in life. You cannot control everything, but you can control how quickly you adjust. And speed of adjustment often determines dominance. Think about modern business. Companies that refuse to adapt to digital transformation disappeared. Leaders who refuse to adapt to cultural shifts lost relevance. Individuals who refuse to update skills become replaceable. The world punishes stagnation. But there is a deeper psychological layer. Identity attachment makes adaptation hard. People cling to the idea, "This is just who I am." But when who you are becomes outdated in a new environment, suffering follows. Strategically intelligent individuals detach ego from strategy. They ask, what does this situation require? Sometimes it requires softness, sometimes firmness, sometimes silence, sometimes aggression, sometimes transparency, sometimes secrecy. The key is controlled flexibility, not emotional reactivity, not moral collapse, but situational intelligence. Here's the danger of rigidity. If your enemy understands your code better than you understand their flexibility, you lose, because they can predict your move, but you cannot predict theirs. Predictability creates tactical disadvantage. Machiavelli admired leaders who could appear merciful when necessary, ruthless when required, generous when beneficial, restrained when strategic, fluid, not fixed. This applies internally too. If you cling to outdated beliefs about your own limits, you trap yourself. If you refuse to update your thinking, you remain emotionally immature. Adaptation requires humility, the humility to admit, the old way no longer works. That sentence alone separates leaders from followers. Now here's the ethical anchor. Adaptation does not mean betrayal of core principles. It means understanding that methods change, principles guide. Direction, for example, your principle may be self-respect. Sometimes self-respect means walking away calmly. Other times it means confronting directly. The principle stays. The method adapts. That is strategic intelligence. Rigid people feel morally superior. Adaptive people survive. And survival, over time, builds power. Remember this. The river survives not because it is rigid like stone. It survives because it flows around obstacles. Stone resists. Water adapts. And over time, water reshapes stone. In competitive environments, the person who adjusts faster than others controls the tempo. Tempo control equals influence. Influence equals power. So ask yourself, where in your life are you being stubborn instead of strategic? Where are you defending identity instead of optimizing outcome? Because the world does not reward intention. It rewards results. And results favor those who can read the room, shift posture, and recalibrate without emotional collapse. Machiavelli did not teach cruelty. He taught survival mechanics, and survival favors the adaptable. But adaptation alone isn't enough, because even the most flexible leader can be destroyed by one thing. You can be feared and survive. You can be envied and survive. You can even be misunderstood and survive. But if you are hated deeply enough, people will sacrifice logic just to see you fall. Hatred overrides self-interest. And when emotion overrides calculation, stability collapses. Machiavelli warned rulers repeatedly, never touch people's property, never touch their families, never humiliate unnecessarily. Why? Because those actions generate personal hatred. And personal hatred spreads like infection. Fear creates distance. Hatred creates unity. When people fear you, they avoid crossing you. When people hate you, they organize against you. That is the difference. Look at history. Many powerful leaders survived strict rule, but once their decisions felt personal, once citizens felt violated rather than governed, rebellion formed. In modern life, this lesson is just as relevant. At work, in business, in relationships. You can enforce standards. You can hold boundaries. You can even fire someone. But if you embarrass them publicly, if you disrespect them personally, if you attack their dignity, you create long-term enemies. And enemies with emotional motivation are dangerous. Here's the psychology. Humans can tolerate strictness. They can tolerate inequality. They can even tolerate dominance. But they cannot tolerate humiliation. Humiliation attacks identity. Identity defense activates aggression. This is why public embarrassment often leads to revenge behavior. This is why sarcastic leaders lose loyalty. This is why partners who mock each other slowly destroy the relationship. Hatred grows when dignity is stripped. Machiavelli's brilliance was understanding that power must feel legitimate, even when it is strict, even when it is decisive. Legitimacy creates compliance without rebellion, and legitimacy requires restraint. Let's go deeper. You do not need everyone to love you. You do not need universal approval, but you must avoid creating concentrated hatred, especially among those who have influence. If one incompetent person dislikes you, it's noise. If 3 respected individuals hate you, it's risk, because social influence multiplies emotion. Hatred spreads faster than admiration, and people bond over shared enemies more easily than shared respect. So how do you avoid hatred while maintaining strength? First, separate correction from insult. Address behavior. Never attack identity. Second, enforce privately when possible. Public dominance may feel powerful in the moment, but it plants seeds. Third, never take what people feel entitled to without explanation. Transparency reduces resentment. Fourth, do not overreach. Power becomes unstable when it appears greedy. If people feel you are extracting more than is fair, resentment grows quietly, and quiet resentment is more dangerous than loud disagreement. Because loud disagreement can be negotiated, silent hatred cannot. There's another subtle layer here. Avoid unnecessary displays of superiority. Arrogance invites emotional retaliation. Confidence earns respect. Arrogance provokes challenge. Machiavelli understood that visible cruelty must be limited and purposeful, not emotional, not repetitive, not personal. Because repeated cruelty erodes legitimacy. And once legitimacy cracks, fear is no longer enough to hold structure. In personal life, this lesson is gold. You can be firm without being cruel. You can leave without humiliating. You can win without mocking. The strongest individuals do not need to crush others publicly. They enforce boundaries calmly. They exit cleanly. They rarely insult because they understand something powerful. Reputation outlives conflict, and hatred stains reputation faster than failure does. Here's the truth most people miss. You can survive mistakes. You can survive misjudgment. But if enough people emotionally want you gone, your environment becomes unstable. So the intelligent strategy is simple. Be strong. Be decisive. Be controlled. But never attack people's core dignity unless survival absolutely demands it. Because dignity is sacred in the human psyche. Touch it recklessly, and people will burn bridges just to feel restored. Machiavelli wasn't advising kindness for morality's sake. He was advising restraint for stability's sake. Avoid hatred, maintain authority, protect legitimacy. Because once hatred spreads, even power begins to shake. And now we arrive at the final lesson, the one that ties everything together. The one about appearing virtuous, even when strategy requires something else. You can be feared and survive. You can be envied and survive. You can even be misunderstood and survive. But if you are hated deeply enough, people will sacrifice logic just to see you fall. Hatred overrides self-interest. And when emotion overrides calculation, stability collapses. Machiavelli warned rulers repeatedly, never touch people's property, never touch their families, never humiliate unnecessarily. Why? Because those actions generate personal hatred. And personal hatred spreads like infection. Fear creates distance. Hatred creates unity. When people fear you, they avoid crossing you. When people hate you, they organize against you. That is the difference. Look at history. Many powerful leaders survived strict rule. But once their decisions felt personal, once citizens felt violated, rather than governed, rebellion formed. In modern life, this lesson is just as relevant. At work, in business. In relationships, you can enforce standards. You can hold boundaries. You can even fire someone. But if you embarrass them publicly, if you disrespect them personally, if you attack their dignity, you create long-term enemies. And enemies with emotional motivation are dangerous. Here's the psychology. Humans can tolerate strictness. They can tolerate inequality. They can even tolerate dominance. But they cannot tolerate humiliation. Humiliation attacks identity. Identity defense activates aggression. This is why public embarrassment often leads to revenge behavior. This is why sarcastic leaders lose loyalty. This is why partners who mock each other slowly destroy the relationship. Hatred grows when dignity is stripped. Machiavelli's brilliance was understanding that power must feel legitimate, even when it is strict, even when it is decisive. Legitimacy creates compliance without rebellion, and legitimacy requires restraint. Let's go deeper. You do not need everyone to love you. You do not need universal approval, but you must avoid creating concentrated hatred, especially among those who have influence. If one incompetent person dislikes you, it's noise. If 3 respected individuals hate you, it's risk, because social influence multiplies emotion. Hatred spreads faster than admiration, and people bond over shared enemies more easily than shared respect. So how do you avoid hatred while maintaining strength? First, separate correction from insult. Address behavior. Never attack identity. Second, enforce privately when possible. Public dominance may feel powerful in the moment, but it plants seeds. Third, never take what people feel entitled to without explanation. Transparency reduces resentment. Fourth, Do not overreach. Power becomes unstable when it appears greedy. If people feel you are extracting more than is fair, resentment grows quietly. And quiet resentment is more dangerous than loud disagreement, because loud disagreement can be negotiated. Silent hatred cannot. There's another subtle layer here. Avoid unnecessary displays of superiority. Arrogance invites emotional retaliation. Confidence earns respect. Arrogance provokes challenge. Machiavelli understood that visible cruelty must be limited and purposeful. Not emotional. Not repetitive. Not personal, because repeated cruelty erodes legitimacy. And once legitimacy cracks, fear is no longer enough to hold structure. In personal life, this lesson is gold. You can be firm without being cruel. You can leave without humiliating. You can win without mocking. The strongest individuals do not need to crush others publicly. They enforce boundaries calmly. They exit cleanly. They rarely insult, because they understand something powerful. Reputation outlives conflict, and hatred stains reputation faster than failure does. Here's the truth most people miss. You can survive mistakes. You can survive misjudgment. But if enough people emotionally want you gone, your environment becomes unstable. So the intelligent strategy is simple. Be strong. Be decisive. Be controlled. But never attack people's core dignity unless survival absolutely demands it. Because dignity is sacred in the human psyche. Touch it recklessly, and people will burn bridges just to feel restored. Machiavelli wasn't advising kindness for morality's sake. He was advising restraint for stability's sake. Avoid hatred, maintain authority, protect legitimacy. Because once hatred spreads, even power begins to shake. And now we arrive at the final lesson. The one that ties everything together. The one about appearing virtuous, even when strategy requires something else. His is the lesson that shocks people, because it sounds like hypocrisy. But it's actually about understanding human psychology. Machiavelli wrote that a ruler must appear merciful, faithful, humane, honest, and religious, even when circumstances require flexibility behind the scenes. Why? Because people judge with their eyes more than their minds. Most people do not investigate deeply. They observe signals. They respond to image. They follow narrative. If you appear unstable, they lose confidence. If you appear immoral, they withdraw trust. If you appear inconsistent, they question your leadership. Perception shapes loyalty, and loyalty sustains power. This lesson is not about becoming fake. It is about separating internal strategy from external presentation. You may calculate carefully. You may analyze risks privately. You may adjust your behavior strategically, but publicly, you maintain composure. You maintain principle. You maintain structure. Because chaos at the top spreads panic below. Here's the deeper psychological layer. Humans crave moral certainty. They want to believe their leaders are good,